The first thing I noticed when I opened my bank app was the quiet hum of my phone, like it was holding its breath. My eyes widened, disbelief rooting me to the spot. Every last digit, every carefully saved penny I had scraped together over years, was gone.
Drained. Zero.
Not a cent left. My chest tightened. My heart thudded violently against my ribs, as if it were trying to escape. I blinked, thinking it was a glitch, a cruel trick of the universe. But no, there it was, the stark truth glowing in cold numbers on my screen. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my hands trembling. The morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, oblivious to the storm in my mind. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, a half-forgotten breakfast from earlier, mocking me. How could this happen? I had been careful, meticulous even, guarding every cent like it was part of me. And yet, in one swift moment, it was gone. I turned, my voice tight and brittle. "Dad, did you?" He was sitting at the dining table, leafing through a newspaper with a casual indifference that made my stomach churn. His eyes flicked up, calm, almost amused. Did I what? His voice carried the same effortless charm that had masked countless manipulations over the years. "My account. It's empty," I said, every word a mixture of fury and disbelief. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair as if the weight of my entire life was just a minor inconvenience to him. "We needed it," he said simply, as though he were explaining why he'd taken a cookie from the jar. The words hit me like ice water. Needed it? Needed it? My mind spun, trying to process, but all it could see were the memories from the family reunion 3 days ago. The laughter, the hugs, the shared stories that now seemed grotesquely staged. The way Dad had smiled at me, asked me to handle the catering costs, to make sure everything ran smoothly, to cover expenses I hadn't known would spiral into the tens of thousands. And all the while, he had been planning this, waiting until I trusted him completely to drain my account. I gritted my teeth, rage mixing with a disbelief, forming a bitter taste at the back of my throat. You can't just take it. That's my money. My savings. Everything I worked for." My voice rose, but it felt small in the cavernous space of betrayal. "Worked for?" he echoed, his tone mocking. "Everything you've got is just numbers on a screen. Numbers don't matter. Family does." I froze. Family. The word that had always been a sanctuary, a shield against the world, was now a weapon pointed directly at me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the sheer audacity of his calmness made me stop short. My mind reeled, my mother's silence, my siblings' avoidance, the way they all seemed to glide past me, pretending nothing had happened. Were they in on it? The memory of my cousin Nina, smiling too brightly at the reunion, flashed in my mind. She had insisted I handle the finances, suggested I take care of the bookings, the catering, the hotel payments. "It's so much easier if you just take care of it," she had said. Her eyes had lingered on me a second too long, her smile too sharp. I had laughed it off then, thought I was being paranoid. But now, I knew. I sank into a chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down like an avalanche. My hands covered my face, and I could feel the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. How had I been so blind? How had I trusted so easily? And why, out of all people, did it have to be my family? Hours passed in a haze of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. I replayed every interaction, every word, trying to pinpoint the moment I had been manipulated. I had always prided myself on my independence, my ability to manage my life, my finances, my choices. But now, in one ruthless sweep, it was all gone. By evening, the house was quiet. The last of the sun bled through the windows, casting long, accusing shadows. I was sitting on my bedroom floor, laptop open, trying to find any way to trace the transactions, any clue as to how this had happened. But the reality was undeniable. My money had vanished, and there was no immediate way to recover it. A sudden knock at the door jolted me. "Aliya, dinner's ready," Mom's voice called softly. There was no urgency in it, no hint of concern, only the habitual gentleness that had always been her shield against confrontation. I closed the laptop with a snap, my fingers shaking. "I'm not hungry," I muttered, voice hollow. She paused, as if sensing the storm brewing inside me, but didn't push. Instead, she left, the door clicking softly behind her. I was alone, yet the room felt suffocating, heavy with the presence of unspoken lies. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad shrug, heard his casual, dismissive words. We needed it. The phrase looped in my mind like a taunt. My anger simmered, transforming into a cold, determined clarity. This wasn't just theft. This was a test, a challenge. And I realized for the first time in a long while that I wouldn't be the passive victim. Not anymore. By morning, the plan had begun to form in the back of my mind. I needed answers. I needed leverage. And most importantly, I needed to reclaim control over my life, whatever it took. But as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where my financial security had once lived, I heard it, the faint ping of a notification on my phone. A message from an unknown number. It read, "You think your father is the only one taking what's yours? Be careful. There are others who've been watching." My breath caught in my throat. Who could it be? And, more importantly, what did they want? And just like that, the calm, controlled world I thought I had built around myself cracked wide open. The morning sunlight was harsh, unforgiving, as if it wanted to expose every secret I'd tried to bury. I stared at the phone in my hand, the anonymous message still blinking on the screen. "You think your father is the only one taking what's yours? Be careful. There are others who've been watching." My stomach twisted. Who else?
And why?
I had always known that my family had secrets, but I never imagined they were watching me. Not like this. Every conversation I'd had over the reunion, every laugh, every smile, now felt like a performance, a carefully orchestrated mask hiding something much darker. I felt the walls of my life closing in, suffocating me, and for the first time in years, I realized how little control I actually had. Determined, I left the house under the pretense of errands and headed to my favorite cafe downtown. I needed space, clarity, and distance from the suffocating familiarity of my family's home. The aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air, but it couldn't soothe the knot in my stomach. I pulled out my laptop and began tracing every financial transaction I could, scanning through receipts, invoices, and bank alerts. Hours passed, punctuated by sips of bitter espresso, my fingers dancing frantically across the keyboard. And then I saw it. A series of transactions, small at first, then larger, routed through accounts I didn't recognize. My heart sank. This wasn't just Dad. This was coordinated. Someone else, someone I trusted, was involved. I thought of Nina immediately. My cousin's too-perfect smile, her insistence on helping me manage the reunion expenses, it all clicked. She had been guiding me, nudging me, making me feel helpful, responsible. Every suggestion she'd made had a purpose. And now, I realized, every step had led to my financial undoing. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not without proof. I needed a plan, patience, and a strategy. My mind raced, bouncing between anger, betrayal, and the faint flicker of determination. I had been blindsided, yes, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. Later that evening, I returned home, careful to mask the storm inside. Dad was in his study, pretending to work, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. He looked up as I entered. "You're quiet today," he remarked casually. I smiled faintly, masking my thoughts. "Just tired." He nodded, satisfied. He thought I didn't suspect him, that I was still the same naive daughter. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Over the next few days, I began digging deeper. I reached out to old contacts, hired a discreet private investigator, and began tracking the flow of money. It was painstaking, slow, and exhausting work, but each discovery sharpened my resolve. I uncovered more than I had expected. Not just my father's accounts, not just Nina's involvement, but a network of relatives and family friends who had been siphoning funds for years, hiding behind smiles and polite gestures. I remember sitting in my apartment late one night, Papers spread across the floor, my laptop glowing faintly in the dark, and realizing the extent of the betrayal. It wasn't just money. It was manipulation, control, power. My family had been using me, testing my loyalty, seeing how far they could push before I broke. And now that I knew, I couldn't remain passive. It was around this time that I began receiving more messages from the unknown number. Short, cryptic, but always chillingly precise. Check the old accounts. Not everything is as it seems. Trust no one, especially those closest to you. Each message was a piece of a puzzle I didn't yet understand, and though part of me wanted to ignore them, another, stronger part felt compelled to follow the trail. One night, as I pored over old bank statements, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A transfer from years ago, one I had completely forgotten, linked to a charity account in my father's name. The donation had seemed innocent at the time, but the amounts were staggering. And when I traced it further, it looped through offshore accounts tied not only to Nina but to several family members I had always trusted. It was a network of deception. And I was right in the center, unsuspecting, vulnerable. But beneath the fear, a spark ignited, something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Power.
Control. Revenge. I realized that I could use this knowledge to my advantage. If they thought I was weak, naive, and obedient, I could turn the tables. I could fight back, not with rage alone, but with strategy, cunning, and patience. The first step was confrontation. Not openly, never openly, but subtly. I began planting seeds of doubt, questioning transactions, asking probing questions that seemed innocent. My father's calm mask cracked slightly each time I asked, and Nina's smile faltered ever so briefly. They didn't know I had discovered their web yet. And then one evening, the breaking point came. Dad was reviewing my father's ledger in the study when I quietly entered, closing the door behind me. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence stretch, heavy and oppressive. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, controlled. "I know everything," I said simply. He looked up, eyes narrowing. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he masked it with that familiar shrug. "Do you now?" I nodded. "The money. The accounts.
Nina.
The offshore transfers. I know it all." He leaned back, calm, almost amused. "And what do you plan to do about it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, I smiled. Not a timid, frightened smile, but one of quiet power. "I'm going to make sure everyone pays. And that includes you." The room seemed to shrink around us, tension thick enough to taste. I didn't flinch as he studied me, his confidence wavering for the first time in my memory. The predator had finally realized the prey had teeth. But just as I felt the momentum shift in my favor, my phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. "You're close. But so are they. Watch your back." A shiver ran down my spine. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. There were larger forces at play, and I realized I wasn't just fighting my father and cousin. I was stepping into a dangerous game I barely understood. And yet, despite the fear, I felt alive. Every betrayal, every lie, every stolen penny had led me to this moment. I had been knocked down, humiliated, and used, but I was no longer helpless. I was awake, aware, and determined. The first moves of my plan were set. I would gather proof, expose the network, and reclaim not just my money, but my dignity. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because betrayal rarely comes alone, and in my family, it ran deeper than anyone could imagine. The morning of the confrontation arrived like a storm. Rain streaked the windows, gray clouds heavy over the city, mirroring the turmoil inside me. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were both sharp and unassuming, a subtle armor. Today, nothing would be left to chance. Every step, every word, every glance was part of the plan I had crafted meticulously over the past few weeks. I had the evidence, bank statements, offshore account records, wire transfers linking Dad, Nina, and several other relatives. I had recorded conversations, messages, and even subtle confessions extracted during seemingly casual discussions. Every piece of proof was a nail in the coffin of their deception, and I was ready to drive them home. I arrived at the family estate under the guise of normalcy. The reunion had long ended, but the house still smelled of lingering perfumes, candle wax, and the faint trace of my father's cologne, olfactory ghosts of the life I had once trusted. My heart pounded as I rang the doorbell. Inside, Dad was lounging in the living room, reading a newspaper, looking as unbothered as ever. Nina sat nearby, her laptop open, fingers flying over the keys. Both of them looked up, startled, when I entered. "Aliya," Dad said, his voice calm but with a hint of suspicion. "Back so soon?" I smiled, a smile that felt like steel wrapped in silk.
Yes.
I thought it was time we had a little family discussion. They exchanged a glance, subtle but loaded. I had seen that look countless times growing up, the one that said we're in control here. But this time it was my turn. I placed a thick folder on the coffee table, letting it land with a firm thud. Papers fanned out slightly, revealing numbers, accounts, transfers. Nina's eyes widened slightly, and I could see the color drain from Dad's face. "Do you recognize this?" I asked softly, almost conversationally. Dad's hands shook imperceptibly as he reached for the papers. Where did you get these?" "I traced every transaction," I said. "Every withdrawal, every transfer, every offshore account. I know about the charity accounts, Nina's involvement, and even your little network of relatives who've been siphoning funds for years." Nina's mouth opened, then closed again. Her fingers hovered over her laptop, a mixture of fear and realization crossing her face. This can't be," Dad muttered, voice cracking slightly. I leaned forward, my tone deliberate, precise. "It is. And the question now isn't whether you did it, it's what you're going to do about it." There was a long pause. The room was thick with tension, the kind that makes every breath feel heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in the silence. Finally, Dad spoke, trying to reclaim some shred of control. We can fix this," he said. "We'll return the money. Just, let's not make a scene." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. I've already documented everything. The authorities will know, the rest of the family will know. But I'm willing to settle this here, now, if you're willing to accept the consequences." Nina's lips pressed into a thin line. "Aliya, you don't understand. We were just taking everything I worked for?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Just betraying your own family?" They had no words. The room was silent except for the distant patter of rain on the roof. I let the silence stretch, letting it press on them as heavily as the betrayal pressed on me. "I want accountability," I said, finally calm again. "I want the money returned. Not just mine, but any funds you've taken from others in this family, people who trusted you. And I want transparency. Every action, every account, every hidden transfer laid bare." Dad's shoulders slumped. I saw it then, the realization that his power had crumbled. Nina's eyes brimmed with something between fear and shame. For the first time, I felt something shift, not just in them, but in myself. Because in that moment, I knew I wasn't just reclaiming stolen money. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. I left the house that day with a folder in my hand, my head held high, rain dripping from my coat. I didn't look back. I felt a strange mix of liberation and exhaustion, but also clarity. I had survived the betrayal, navigated the deception, and emerged stronger. In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly to ensure that the stolen funds were returned, that accountability was enforced, and that the web of manipulation within the family was exposed. The process was grueling: calls, meetings, legal consultations, but with every step, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a fierce sense of empowerment. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I reflected on the journey. The family reunion, the laughter, the smiles, the hidden malice, had been a crucible. It had forced me to confront betrayal, deception, and the fragility of trust. But it had also revealed my resilience, my strength, and my ability to fight back. I realized then that true empowerment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about reclaiming my agency, standing firm in the face of deceit, and refusing to be defined by others' selfishness. And yet, as much as I had regained, a part of me knew the world had changed. My family would never be the same. The trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. But that was a price I was willing to pay for freedom. Months later, as I sat in a sunlit cafe, reviewing the last of the paperwork, my phone buzzed. A familiar, anonymous number. My heart skipped a beat. "You did well. They won't see you coming next time." I smiled, a small, confident curve of the lips. The words no longer frightened me. I had learned to navigate betrayal, to anticipate deception, to protect myself. I had risen from the ashes of my family's treachery stronger, wiser, and unyielding. "Let them come," I whispered, almost to myself. "I'm ready." For the first time in years, I felt truly untouchable, not because I had power over others, but because I had power over myself. And in that power, I found peace. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed clean, sharp, and bright. And so had I.